All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be dialing in from around the world. Thank you for joining us. My name's Ian Collins, and it's my pleasure to be hosting this webinar on addressing the human element in maritime. This is a collaboration with Fisher Improvement Technologies, who I work for, and Safe Lanes Consulting. We're very pleased to have us with us today, Rob Fisher, President and Director of Operations, Fisher Improvement Technology. I'll give him a chance to introduce himself in just a minute. Justin Fisher, tech genius, moderating the webinar. We've got Matt Schlapford down in Australia, and Rachit Jain, Managing Director of Safe Lanes over in Singapore. I'll give him a chance to introduce himself in just a bit. Just to say a bit of background about who we are. Again, my name's Ian Collins. I've been working with Fish Improvement Technologies for a number of years now, and consulting to high-risk industries for about 15 years. I came from largely oil and gas, but I've spent the last about 10 to 12 years consulting around the world to many different high-risk industries: mining, oil, nuclear, aviation, civil, et cetera, and we're very excited to be delving more and more into the world of the shipping and maritime industries. So, really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you today. Fisher Improvement Technologies as an organization has been around for about 30 years. And again, I'll get Rob to say a bit more about the background of the company. We are known in the industry as the practical application specialist for human and organizational performance, and have worked all over the world helping take the science of human error reduction and turn it into practical applications that people out there in the field can use to reduce the likelihood that they're going to make an error, particularly one that can be catastrophic. We've done over about 100 successful integrations into all sorts of different industries. Rachit, myself, and Rob recently authored a white paper in light of some new regulations coming to the shipping and maritime industries to look at and address the human element, or the human factor framework as OCIMF have described it. That paper I'll make reference to a bit later in this presentation, but that's available for you to download to have a look at as well. As a company, we're recognized as a really big contributor to the reduction of fatalities in serious high-risk industries. And as the tagline says there, where thought leadership meets practical application. With that, I'd just like to introduce Rob Fisher. Rob's based over in Charlotte, North Carolina, where their head office is. It's 3 o'clock in the morning there. So, Rob, we really appreciate you being on board and being a part of this webinar.
Thanks for having me, Ian, and welcome everyone. We're proud to put this on. Again, I'm Rob Fisher. I'm the President and Director of Operations for Fisher Improvement Technologies. And we have spent the last 30 years helping people understand how and why people get hurt and make mistakes, especially if those mistakes could be catastrophic. I got my start in the nuclear power industry, both in the United States Navy, so I have a little bit of sea time, almost 10 years, and then in commercial nuclear power. And when commercial nuclear power started trying to get their arms around human error after 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, I was one of a small team of people that put together the human performance, human factor standards for the U.S. nuclear industry that then became the World Association of Nuclear Operators, Institute for Nuclear Power Operations. And I left commercial nuclear power in 1996, started my first company in 1992. And we have been helping people in high-risk industries understand how and why people make mistakes ever since. A few years ago, we added personality diversity into our understanding of how people see and manage risk. We understand that people with different personalities see and manage risk differently. And then not long ago, we got in touch with Rachit and his company, Safe Lanes. And we started talking about how there could be some synergies between their approach at Safe Lanes in helping the shipping industry be safe and the lessons that we've learned in over 30 years. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. We'll be behind the scenes for any questions you might have. And thank you everybody for coming.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate that. I'd like to introduce Rachit Jain. For those that don't know, he's the Managing Director of Safe Lanes Consulting based out of Singapore. Rachit, would you like to just say a few words?
Sure. Thanks, Ian, for moderating this. And thanks, Rob, for taking out time at so early and joining this. Edward Deming, in his book, Out of the Crisis, quoted that a bad system will beat a good person every time. At Safe Lanes, we work with over 100 ship owners managers, enhancing their quality assurance system and processes. Hi, my name is Rachit Jain. I'm Managing Director at Safe Lanes, and we at Safe Lanes we expertise in delivering marine quality assurance services, such as conducting management reviews and gap analysis of companies' management systems against industry standards and best practices, audits and inspections, including remote audits, carrying out incident investigations, remote videos. Uh, we also offer TMSA-based marine quality assurance software and various class-approved value-added courses. Now, with the recent focused attention of IMO, oil majors, and OCIMF on human factor, we also see a need to create better awareness on the understanding of human factor and its integration into office and vessel operations. Uh, this was also the time when we joined hands with Fisher Improvement Technologies to not only train our auditors, but also to use their expertise to create awareness and provide various service offerings on human element, especially in regards to the upcoming TMSA element on human factor, where they are talking about the 5 pillars. Uh, so in this webinar, our intention is to just give that introduction on the human element, which Ian would take you through. So now I would just hand over back to Ian to start its presentation. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, Rachit. Appreciate that too. So like Rachit said, we're going to be looking at giving you a bit of an understanding into the science basis for understanding the human element, and introduce a couple of definitions and tools for around managing error that you can immediately start to use today. We've spent a good amount of time really looking at this upcoming TMSA element and looking at the OCIMF framework that they outline with regard to the human factor. I'll just note at this point, they use the term human factor, but they also make note in their documents that human factor, human element, which is very big in IMO, human and organizational performance, they're interchangeable to a large degree. So we talk largely around human and organizational performance, or HOP, but please hear it as human factors as well. So we're going to look at, we've mapped our technology and our methodology across these 5 pillars that they outline in the human factor framework. So we'll be looking at how human organizational performance really maps particularly well in addressing those 5 pillars, and then give you an opportunity to answer and have any questions answered. I'm going to be delivering content for about an hour, and then we'll take about half an hour or so or more of questions. At any point in time, please feel free to use the chat function to ask a question, and then Justin will help us and moderate those and answer those afterwards. So with that, and I didn't prompt Rachit for introducing Deming there, but thank you for doing that. Just to give you some background into where the science of human organization performance actually comes from. And Rob mentioned 2 major nuclear incidents, and one of them was 3 Mile Island in the States in 1979, then Chernobyl, which most of us are very familiar with in 1986 in the Ukraine. And in the aftermath of these events, there was, particularly with 3 Mile Island, and the operator who just happened to be at that panel that day performed a function, took an action that resulted in a catastrophic outcome. And the industry, the regulator, they all sort of named, blamed, and shamed this individual for what they deemed to be his error. And there was a couple of people around at the time. One notably, James Reason, is in the bottom left-hand corner there. You may know from models like the Swiss cheese model. He said, we got to look at this a bit differently. And if we put someone at the panel that day who had the same background, the same training, the same experience, would they have taken the same action? And if your answer to that is yes, then you haven't got a problem with that individual per se, but something in your system is having that action make sense to that person. A lot of human factor, human element, human organizational performance is built on quality management principles that were developed by W. Edwards Deming. And what Deming said, exactly like Rachel mentioned, was that a bad system will beat a good person every time. These principles have laid the foundation. One of Deming's principles was in any industrial setting, when we have an event, a bad outcome, there's a 90% chance that it was caused by something other than just the individual. If we just fix the individual, we might fix the problem for now, but if we fix the system, we fix it for good. So human organizational performance is a systemic approach to managing error, where it looks at flaws in our system. So we have the task-based system, and on any given task, an individual in the middle of it is surrounded and influenced by people and programs and processes and the work environment and the organization and the equipment. So often our human nature, if you think about this in terms of, let's say, a house plant, for example, you have a plant and that plant isn't performing, it's not growing the way you designed. Do we blame the plant? No, we look at those elements that surround it, that influence it, the soil, the sunlight, the water, et cetera, et cetera. Similarly, with an individual, we are influenced by all these other factors that surround us and influence our performance. And at the same time, we can influence those factors as well. Rob mentioned traditionally the generalized science of human organizational performance assume that individuals in the middle of this system will react very similarly to changes in the system. But we now know with our understanding of personality tendencies that different people with different personality tendencies will react differently to changes in that system. So we need to manage that personality piece as well. That forms the basis of our advanced error reduction offering. We're not going to talk much about that today, but just to make you aware. This individual in the middle of it, they have their own individual drivers, but where human organizational performance mainly focuses is on the system. So Formula One, for example, you have the racing car driver. At the end of the day, are they just solely responsible for winning the race? No, there's all those other elements, the pit crews and the equipment and the other drivers and the weather, and there's all these other factors that influence their performance. So we want to take more of a systemic approach and help understand what are the systemic elements that are influencing individual performance. So it's an interconnected, interdependent model. And we have what we call latent conditions. These are flaws in our system, organizational weaknesses. And a large percentage of the work we do is to look at these flaws in our system, these latent conditions, and address those. And we have ways of finding where those flaws are so that they don't eventually line up and turn into some sort of bad outcome. But human error, we often, when we talk about human error, air crash is a good example. As soon as a plane goes down, so often the media is on the scene and they say it was caused by pilot error, and there's this bit of a misconception that human error is a cause. Now, can it be a cause? Absolutely, but it's more often a consequence of a poorly designed or having a system in which there's flaws in there. So yes, the human makes an error, but it's a function, it's a consequence of the system driving that error. So we're going to look at human error as more of as a consequence rather than a cause. As I mentioned, just some basic understandings, 90% of events are caused by something other than just the individual. Again, this comes from Deming, where he looked at, we need to look at the system as a whole rather than just focus on the individual. Now, was the individual involved? Absolutely. But if all we did was change that individual, again, we might just fix the problem in the short term, but that those systemic flaws stay out there waiting for that next person to come in and the conditions to align that are going to lead to the same outcome. If you're having repeat events in your organization, there's a very very good chance that you may have fixed the individual, but haven't fixed the flaws in the system. So we want to look at the system as a whole. 90% of people react very similarly, and this is physiologically, to the same stimuli. If as an example, if you're running late for a meeting and you can't find your keys or your wallet and you're trying to race out the door, 95% of people will react very similarly to that same set of circumstances and start to rush, start to, blood pressure goes up, the adrenaline kicks in. We most of the time we have a very similar physiological response to that stimuli. Dr. Sidney Dekker, a great thought leader in this sort of field, wrote one of the best books on human error called The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error. Highly recommended reading. And what Dr. Dekker said was that if we believe most people come to work every day to do a pretty good job, most people don't intend to come to work and get hurt. So if they're involved in some sort of bad outcome, then something must have been going on at the time that had whatever action they took make sense to them. He said people do what they do at the time they do it for reasons that make sense to them at the time. What we know is that human performance is not common sense. What is having things make sense to people is how this task-based system is influencing their performance. Where are the flaws in that system that are having an action make sense to someone at the time, but are ultimately resulting in the bad outcome? So we take this systemic approach to managing error and look at fixing those flaws in the system. At the same time, it comes with an understanding that you and I and all humans are fallible. Even the best of us are going to make mistakes. So we need to ensure that our systems can be tolerant of an error. So we reduce the consequences of this error. We're going to, as part of the white paper, we introduce a formula for managing error called the Human Performance Index, which looks at reducing errors. How can we do that? Reducing the likelihood that they're going to occur, and then also mitigating the consequences. That's ultimately how we're going to reduce our incidents out there in the workplace. I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. So most problems in industry are related to human error. As I mentioned, they're not always caused by human error, but they are certainly related. You know, people touch things, bad things happen. So they're related, but they're more systemically driven rather than, and a consequence rather than them actually being the cause. In order for us to reduce error, then we need to know what an error is. And where certain terms in industry have become less loosely defined or more loosely defined, we are very stringent in terms of our definitions. To give you a very simple example, if the term accident, if I ask 4 different people on this webinar right now, what is an accident? The likelihood is that we're going to get 4 different responses to that question. And then if I ask them to go out and do an accident investigation, the likelihood then is, based on their definition, we're going to get 4 different outcomes. So we're very stringent with our terms, and one of the main term is an error. If we want to reduce error, we need to know what an error is. An error is an action or inaction that unintentionally results in an undesirable or unwanted condition. It leads a task or system outside its limits, or it deviates from a rule, standard, or expectation. The most important word there, you can probably tell, is unintentional. And there's a very big difference between an error and a violation, which I'll get into in a minute. My question to you would be, what inside of that definition, what do you think it is that is unintentional? A lot of people will say it was, the action that was unintentional. But if I go to reach for my microphone here, and in the process accidentally knock over my glass of water, my action of reaching for the microphone is intentional. It's the outcome that is unintentional. Most people's actions out there in the workplace are well-intentioned. They're not trying to cause incident. It's the outcome that is unintentional. So we end up having an event, which is the undesirable result of an error or a set of errors. We need to learn to really separate the error from the event. So often we have an event, a bad outcome, and we get caught up in the actual event itself, instead of working our way back and looking at where the error occurred. That's going to give us our opportunity to fix the system rather than get caught up in the error. So we have errors for one. A deviation we define as not strictly complying with a rule, standard, or expectation. But a violation is very different. A violation is an action or inaction that intentionally deviates from a rule, standard, or expectation. Violations and errors and violations are very different things, yet we often don't treat them as different things. Someone is involved in a bad outcome, and our almost immediate human impulse is to look to blame. And if we're treating everything like violations and assuming that someone had some sort of conscious intent to not follow a rule, standard, or expectations, we're going to miss those flaws in our system that can really help us fix the system for good. So we need to understand these definitions and treat them very differently. And we have a lot of tools and processes that can help us do that. Just a couple other things in terms of errors. We have two types of errors. One is an active error. These are something that has immediate consequence. I turn this knob, something happens. I press this button, something happens. Those are the easy ones to find. And often our systems are set up, our processes out there are set up to spot active errors. But where the real science of human organizational performance, we want to look at those latent conditions. And these are these things that are laying dormant out there in our systems, just waiting for the conditions to align that are going to result in the bad outcome. If we can focus there, and again, we have a lot of tools and processes that can help us identify these, we reduce the likelihood that we're going to make, that person, that worker out there in the field is going to make an active error that brings the latent error to the surface. One thing for leaders, if leaders don't know what the definition of an error is, it's very hard for the workforce to really believe that you want to help them prevent them. So those are some definitions. And when we think about bad things happening, the science tells us about 15% of all bad things that happen are outside of organizational control. These are things like natural phenomena, isolated equipment failure. There's not a lot we can do with these other than prepare for a response. So we're not going to focus on those right now. But for the remainder of the bad outcomes, about 85% of all bad things that happen, 90% of those are caused by an error, an action or inaction that unintentionally results in an undesirable or unwanted condition, leads the task or system outside of limits, or it deviates from a rule, standard, or expectation. And there's about 10% that are a violation, which is where there is conscious intent to deviate from some rule, standard, or expectation. And these are driven by our system. Something in our system is having it make sense that someone takes an action that results in an error or a violation. Our system is causing these. The remainder, about less than 10%, are an isolated error where there is no systemic drivers. Someone just trips over in the car park. There was nothing in our system that drove that event. They just had a slip or a lapse. They made an error. And the little red box down here is what we call our isolated violations, where someone had conscious intent to deviate from some rule, standard, or expectation, and nothing in our system caused them to do that. Nothing in our system was driving that behavior. They just made a conscious decision to take that action. When companies start to understand this principle, they start to realize, and most of the organizations that we've worked with really started to realize they've been treating that little red box like it was a lot bigger. And typically how this plays out in organizations is when, and I've certainly experienced this in a role of being a safety advisor on offshore drilling rigs, whenever we had an event, there was an immediate response by management saying, we need a report, within the hour, who did it, what have you done to them? And whenever we ask those sort of questions, we're never going to get information that helps us identify those systemic flaws in our system. If our immediate response to failure or when bad things happen is to ask, why did this happen? Who did it? What have you done to them? We are never going to get good information, and we're going to keep having repeat events because it doesn't give us the information we need to fix those systemic flaws. One of the things that we coach leaders around, whenever we have an event, you do not ask why for the first 48 hours. Why is a causal technique. It'll come out in the causal analysis. We want to know what happened and how it happened. Are they safe? Is the plant safe? Is the asset safe? And then, how did it happen? We need to get that data that can help us understand what was going on in the system that had the action make sense to that person. All this information comes from root cause data, international airline data, with Deming and his principles, and with James Reason managing the risks of organizational accidents. When the whole concept of human error was being, the science behind it was being developed, there was a couple of Scandinavian researchers started to ask the question, is human error predictable? Can we actually predict error rates on anyone given a certain task? And up until that point, some people just seem to make more errors than others. And they really started to look at this concept, what they deemed performance modes. And what they found was that rather than floating in and out of all these different mental models all day, you and I and everyone else only flowed into and out of what three different mental models. They call them performance modes. And they were very smart when they looked at these mental models relate to this person doing this task at this time. Often we fall into the trap of thinking because an organization does a certain task quite often, that we're all going to be in the same mental mode when it comes to doing that task. It doesn't matter how many times an organization has done a certain task. It only matters how many times this person doing this task at this time has done it, because that's going to determine the mental model that they're in for that day or for that task. And it also then determines what their likely error rate is. So these two researchers came up with this concept of performance modes, and they called them firstly skill-based. And skill-based doesn't have anything to do with your technical skills. It means these are things that we do out of habit with little or no conscious thought, things like brushing our teeth. If you drive, not a lot of us drive at the moment, but if you did used to drive to work and you took the same route, going home to work, work to home, repeatedly, at a certain period of time, you can start to do it unconsciously. And some of you may have experienced when you may have pulled into the driveway at home and thought, I can't remember the last little part of the journey. It's a pretty good indication we're doing it almost unconsciously. When we're doing things out of habit, the error rate is 1 in 1,000. It's a pretty good error rate. In fact, the standard human error rate is 3 in 1,000. So when we can get to a place of doing something out of habit and our error rate is 1 in 1,000, it's a very good error rate. Unfortunately, there's certain criteria that shift something to become more habitual, and we need to do it greater than 50 times, and it needs to be less than 7 steps. And unfortunately, a lot of the processes and activities we've got out in the work field don't qualify to be able to shift to that skill-based performance mode in terms of our mental model. Our second performance mode is what we call rule-based. And these are, there's a rule, I know there's a rule. I don't necessarily have to know the rule, but I need to know it exists. We have a lot of procedures, processes, rules that we have out there in the workplace. No one can know all the rules, but as long as they know that the rule exists when there is a process, the error rate is 1 in 100. We can still make errors when we have a procedure. If the step's misapplied or it's incorrect or we skip a step, we can still have errors, but the error rates is 1 in 100. The last performance mode is what they called it knowledge-based, but it's really a lack of knowledge. And this is where there is a gap in our information as it relates to that task at that time. To give you an example of this, imagine if you're out driving somewhere, out in the country, you've lost cell phone reception, so you've lost your navigation system, and you get lost, and you get to a fork in the road. How long do you think it takes, if you pull off to the side of the road, how long do you think it takes before that piece of information sort of magically comes into your brain that tells you which way to go? You could sit there forever, because there is a gap in our information as it relates to that particular task at that time. So we need some sort of external reference. In that case, a map, or call someone a subject matter expert, or a document that tells us where to go. When we have a gap in our information, there is a 10 to 50% chance that the next action we take is going to result in an error. So we don't want people out there in the field having up to a 50% chance that whatever action they're going to take is going to result in an error. So we need to help them identify when they, particularly if they're in knowledge-based performance mode, there is a gap in their information. And we start to see what we call triggers. These are these verbal and visual clues that tells you someone is in knowledge-based performance mode. If you see me scratching my head, for example, that is a very good clue that as it relates to what I'm doing, there is a gap in my information. If I use terms like, well, I think it's this, that is a clue, a trigger that tells you there is a gap in my information as it relates to that task at that time. So we want to help people and help our workers respond to those triggers. Triggers are these verbal, visual clues, signals, indication, prompts that tell us we are about to make an error. So we need to become very, very good at responding to them. A trigger, like the trigger on a nozzle, is designed to elicit a response. We pull the trigger, spray comes out. We want to help our workforce become very good at responding to these triggers. And a lot of the training we do at that level, we have different sort of levels of training. At the worker level, a lot of it is focused on being able to identify and respond to these triggers. Our personality tendencies certainly come into play here. Some people will say different things based on their personality, where I may say, I think, they may say, I'm absolutely certain. And so we need to really help people understand that aspect as well. Our senses, touch, sight, smell, taste, hearing, these are all clues. If I smell smoke, that's a clue that I need to respond to that event. But we also have this gut feeling as well, that sixth sense. And our gut feeling is typically good at telling us something's not right here. It's not necessarily good at telling us exactly what that is, but we want to be able to respond to that trigger as well. Triggers tell us a trap exists. There are error traps, and there is a number of error traps in looking at root cause data. These are what we call performance hazards, or error traps is another term. In industry, we've become very good at identifying physical hazards, and we've spent a long time identifying those physical hazards out there in the workplace. The next level is being able to identify these performance hazards, or these error traps, these things that are going to increase the likelihood that I'm going to make an error. These are the top 10. There are more, but these are the top 10 when root cause data was analyzed. These are the ones that came in the most. The first three, stress, multitasking or high workload, or time pressure, all feel the same. When we're under stress, our adrenals kick in, we start to rush, we start to speed up. And there's, I mentioned human performance is not common sense. One of the expressions we use is slow down to speed up. And that is not common sense. So we need to coach people and really educate them how when they start to experience stress or high workload, or they're feeling under time pressure and they have that physiological response, we need to coach them to slow down, because the likelihood of making an error has just gone through the roof with those three factors. The next one, poor communications, vague or poor written guidance, overconfidence, or infrequent or first-time tasks. These all either put us in or they keep us in knowledge-based performance mode. If you're being assigned a task and someone doesn't give you particularly good information about how to do that task, there's vague guidance, or they don't tell you everything you need to know, there is now a gap in your information as it relates to that task at that time. Overconfidence is a killer. Overconfidence, when the root cause analysis was analyzed for the past 50 years, overconfidence was found to be in about 90% of events. Overconfidence really shrouds our ability to tell that we are now in knowledge-based performance mode. And when we hear terms like, I've done this a million times, I've got this, don't worry about it. Those are all clues, those are triggers that tell us someone is in overconfident as it relates to that task. We need to be able to respond to that, because the likelihood of them about to make an error has just gone through the roof. The last three here, distractions, first working day following time off, greater than 4 days, certainly applicable in shipping industries, and the end of work or extended hours. These all start to interact with the other traps. I know, workers out there often do very long, hitches on board a vessel. You can imagine, and I'm sure you've experienced it, I'm sure your data probably tells it, those sort of last day or last 2 days before heading off on time off, as well as coming back, the incident rate, they're much higher on those days. So, if I'm getting to the end of a task or the end of work and I haven't completed what I need to do, all of a sudden time pressure kicks in, stress kicks in. These last three all start to interact with those other traps. A lot of the work we do, as I mentioned, we've become very good at identifying physical hazards. Where we want to go is to really help people identify these performance hazards, these things that can get injected into a task that now increase the likelihood that we're going to make an error. So we have traps, triggers, and then we have tools. And tools are about helping both the individual, the supervisors, and the organization reduce likelihood that they're going to make an error. So they reduce the probability that we make an error. When we think about that system, if we think about the individual in the middle of that system as like the last layer of defense, we like a goalkeeper in soccer or hockey. We want to, as an organization, reduce the likelihood that we're going to need to call on that last layer of defense. So we try and prevent shots on goal by having barriers in place to prevent the shots on goal. At the same time, we want to make that goalkeeper, that worker out there in the field, the most robust, resilient, best worker we can make them. So we have tools that they can use on an individual level that can really help them reduce the likelihood that they're going to make an error themselves. So we have individual tools. I'm not going to go through them in a lot of detail, but just to let you know that, that they exist. One of them is a very simple yet so powerful tool called verbalized point and touch. You'll see example is the Japanese rail system uses verbalized point and touch. They have an impeccable safety record. And what verbalized point and touch does, it helps our brains often outrun our body's ability. And what verbalizing, pointing and touching to something, it helps slow us down to the speed at which our body can operate. And it sort of files things as done. If you've ever left the house and can't remember if you locked the door or put the garage door down or turned the stove off, What verbalizing, pointing, and touching does is help us sort of log that action as having been completed, so we don't have to think about it anymore. It's very simple. It's, we verbalize what our intended action is. We point to the system, we point to whatever we're going to move, and then we touch it. And then we register it as complete. We verbalize it again. The verbalizing part is very important. There's a couple of videos we've got on the Improve with Fit site worth having a look at. Step by step is our verbalize, point, and touch is our tool for skill-based performance mode. Step by step is our tool for rule-based performance mode, where we follow procedure step by step as designed. If we come to a place where it either doesn't make sense or it's out of sequence, that's where we want to stop. And stop and seek out help is our tool for knowledge-based performance mode. When we get to a place in a task where there is a gap in my information as it relates to that task at that time, I can't think my way out of this. I need to get some sort of external reference, whether it be from a supervisor or documentation, that can then put me back into rule-based performance mode. So those are our tools that we use on an individual level. As a group, we have some error reduction tools, 3-part communication, pre-task briefing, and a workflow process. And then as leaders, there's tools as well. Show and tell is a tool. Someone comes to you as a subject matter expert. We want to start to model the behavior. We want people out there using procedures. So we model the use of that procedure. We go and find the document, and that way they know where to get this in the future. And then last one is what we call values-based and method-based observations. A lot of companies will have observation programs, and a lot of them are focused purely on the method, how people are doing something. Are they doing it safely? We want to shift that a little bit and look at what we call values-based observations. Again, I'm not going to get into a huge amount of detail, but this is a game changer out there in terms of the ability for leaders to really connect with their workers out there. I'll say that for now. So with that being said, OCIMF put out a document called the Human Factors Framework, where they outline these 5 pillars as a foundation for how to address the human element within the shipping and maritime industries. And I just want to briefly go through how some of our tools and our processes really map so perfectly to these 5 pillars that they outlined. The first one being leading and shaping the culture that you want. We have a number of leadership models that we use, 2 notable ones there, the GEAR model and the essential leadership cycle. These are models that really help leaders manage the resources of that task-based system. And it looks at making sure people are aligned with it. They have self and team awareness. They have a shared vision and values. There's clarity of roles and processes. This model has been proven to be exceptionally powerful in really helping leaders understand where the driving elements of problems are in their organization. We help leaders understand this concept of values-based engagements to assess and manage a just and sustainable organizational culture. We strictly adhere to those science-based definitions. And then as leaders proceed through the critical elements of deployment, we call it education, integration, and sustainability. OCIMF call it capability, integration, advocacy. They're exactly the same. It's the same concept of educating the organization, helping them. The most critical step is then integrating that education piece into the day-to-day workflow of the organization. Human and organizational performance, it's not a new program. It's not sort of flavor of the month or anything like that. It is a different perspective, a different approach to managing error that typically integrates seamlessly with their already existing safety management system. So that's where we started to look at leading and shaping the culture. We talk about well-executed tasks and procedures. We have a number of task-based system. We have a number of models that we use, the WITH model, traps, triggers, and tools. we do a lot of work, and one of our main areas of expertise is around effective written guidance. We offer a number of workshops on that. And we have, you know, most organizations aren't aware that there's actually 25 known procedural error traps. And they are so often, we see them all the time, written into documents that are now increasing the likelihood that that worker out there in the field is going to make an error. So we help train particularly procedure writers in how to not write error traps into their written documents. This is, you know, huge. I know your industry uses a lot of procedures, and so we want to make sure that we're not setting our end users up for failure by having error traps within our documentation. What else? Well-designed equipment and controls. Human error, you know, it happens if you think about it, layers of the Swiss cheese. We can make errors at the design or the installation or the operating and the maintenance. You know, there's so many opportunities. So we help the organization sort of look at all those different layers and how to reduce errors at all layers, not just, you know, focusing on that end user. We use a lot of electronic technologies as well and have partnerships there to ensure we can bring those latent conditions, those latent errors, those systemic flaws to the surface before they turn into a bad outcome. Skills to respond to emerging situations, so enabling effective response by recognizing those traps and triggers, educating workers how to do that, educating the organization. If we use the right tool at the right time, it reduces that error rate. We can in fact reduce our error rate by factors of 10. So you can have someone on a task one day in knowledge-based performance mode where the error rate is 50%. By using the tools, stop and seek out help, getting that external documentation, they're now in rule-based, they follow it step by step and use verbalized point at the critical step. They've now reduced their error rate to 1 in 1,000. And for tasks we do in skill-based performance mode, we use verbalized point and touch. We can actually get our error rate to 1 in 10,000. That's the best we can get a human being to. So we use those recognition, responding to the traps and the triggers, and use our tools to reduce our error rates, and making sure we've got processes in place to capture things like near misses, near hits. Those are signals, those are indications of flaws in our system. So we want to make sure there's a culture where people are encouraged and feel comfortable coming forward with those, and at the same time have processes in place that can capture that information so we can fix the system rather than it resulting in some bad outcome. And then learning before and after things go wrong. So understanding and managing errors using the task-based system, the essential leadership cycle. And then again, one of our other major areas of expertise is in causal analysis, and run a lot of workshops and training and education on major and minor incident analysis, using human element concepts and understanding things from that human organizational performance perspective to really get to, so often, and we see it all the time, when something bad happens, well, ultimately it lands on procedure not followed. We can't just stop there. We need to dig deeper. So a lot of our causal analysis methodology really helps take the organization deeper and understand, well, what was the root cause? What was the systemic driver of the procedure not followed? And that way we can really fix it at the root rather than seeing that repeat happen again. I mentioned earlier, we developed a formula for managing error and reducing incidents. And this systemic approach, yes, it has a major influence on reducing incidents, but it has another, the system applies whether we're looking at safety or quality or effectiveness or efficiency. So yes, whilst reducing incidents is our major focus, we start to see quality go up. We start to see a reduction in rework. We start to see productivity go up. And it really comes down to looking at this formula here. So how do we reduce incidents? Well, we reduce them by reducing errors. We want to maximize our defenses, and then we want to mitigate our consequences. So in reducing errors, how do we do that? Well, we have the task-based system, understanding errors, violations, performance modes, traps, triggers, et cetera, and our personality tendencies. How do we maximize our defenses? Well, we've got our tools, layers of protection, hierarchy of controls, effective written guidance, et cetera. And then how do we mitigate the consequences? Through risk recognition, hazard assessment, leader tools, the essential leadership cycle, and so on and so forth. When we do that and we implement and integrate all those things, number of incidents comes down, the significance of incidents comes down, and the quality of our analysis and corrective actions goes up. My question would be, where do you think most organizations focus? And it's typically on that physical hazard recognition, compensatory measures, and then on the defenses, those layers of protection or hierarchy of controls. And they're missing out so many other opportunities to reduce errors, maximize their defenses, mitigate their consequences, and ultimately reduce their incidents. So we help shift organizations' focus to look at these other elements, and it has a significant impact out there in the field. This is all captured in this white paper that Rob Ratchet and myself authored, available on at onlineimprovewithfit.com and on the Safe Lane site. Highly recommend having a read through, because it goes into those elements in much greater detail. Love your feedback on it as well. So again, in ICIMF's document, they talk about building capability, integration, and advocacy. We just use slightly different terms, but it's exactly the same principle of education, integration, and sustainability. It all starts at the education, and it starts at the education of senior leaders, because if senior leaders aren't willing to use some different terms, change some of their behaviors, it's really going to struggle to filter down to the organization. So we have a number of our biggest goal in working with an organization is to build capability as quickly as possible, as quickly and efficiently as possible, and as sustainably as possible. We do a lot of work around building internal capability. So you've got resources within the organization to drive the sustainability of managing the human element. But it all starts with education. So a number of workshops, and then it's that key piece about taking all these concepts and putting it into the day-to-day, the integration aspect. How do we integrate it into your system? Again, we're not trying to change anything. It's a different perspective that integrates seamlessly into existing systems. It's a key piece which a lot of sort of companies out there miss. And then it's about building that resiliency, building that sustainability, intellectual property transfer, so it can become yours, white labeling, so it can go into your own learning management system, et cetera. So our goal is to really help build that sustainability as effectively and efficiently as possible. So with that being said, I hope I hope that's sort of given you a bit of an understanding, introduce you to some of the science basis for understanding the human element, a few definitions and some of the tools to manage error. Look at how human organizational performance really maps and impacts those 5 pillars. And then we're going to take an opportunity to answer any questions you might have from here. I hope that has been of value to you in really understanding a bit more about the human element, and particularly in light of upcoming need to address this in the shipping and maritime industries. And with that, I would like to open the floor to any questions that you might have, and appreciate. Before I do that, I'd just like to say there's a lot of content available on the online .improvewithfit.com website. There's a number of free resources. There's a ton of content on there actually. And there's a lot of, we've spent the majority of this year shifting to a more virtual offering, given the current circumstances in the world. So there's a number of courses that will really can take you into the concept of the human element in much greater detail than we've covered here. There's a LinkedIn group, more than welcome to join. Love to have your input there. Please connect with myself, Rob, Ratchet. Safe Lanes are introducing the human element assessment as part of their auditing offerings. So highly recommend getting in touch with Ratchet as well to look and set up a time where you can discuss that further. So with that, thank you again, and I'd like to open the floor to questions.
Thank you very much, Ian. I do have one question that came in, and then Fletcher, I see your hand is raised. I'll go ahead and unmute you after this first question. So Ian, Rob, Ratchet, where will you place negligence by an individual in this model? Will it be considered the same as an intentional violation?
I'm gonna have a drink of water and let Rob answer that one.
Good, thanks, Ian. Yeah, so negligence was really the fall person for a lot of things until we really started understanding the way humans behave and the way humans work, and that's really been in the last 15, 20 years. So yes, negligence would be over in the isolated violation area, but it's actually a step further. There's just so little of it truly out there when you actually analyze. So if you notice the size of the little red box, by the time you get to negligence, if you don't start there, then you've gone through all of the iterations of discovering what it really is. In the end, negligence is that isolated violation where someone knows that what they're doing is outside the rule, and they know there will be a bad outcome. And so all of the data, all the information, and certainly our experience shows that that's much lower than has been diagnosed in the past, because we lumped everything together. Errors, violations, deviations, active errors, latent errors, and negligence were all lumped into one. So I hope that answers your question. Yes, it would be there, but it would be in that little red box. So we have to look at all of those other potential attributes first. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you for answering that, Rob. Fletcher, I saw your hand was raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. What I want to know is, how do you address mindsets that underlie unsafe behavior practices? Because you talk a lot of processes, yes, but at the end of the day, it comes to the individual, right? And his mindset. So how do you address mindsets in this case?
So I'll take that one again as well. Mindsets are an interesting element because, you have the human mindset that very often gets listed to an individual mindset. And when you give people a system to look at, they will look at that system. But absent you giving them the system to look at, then their mind is going to go to wherever it thinks it needs to go on a given task at a given time. The systems approach doesn't say that everything is now to blame the system. The individual has no blame, because it's not about blame. So Fletcher, that's a great question, because it is all about establishing a mindset that gives someone something to look at and understand to reduce the probability that they'll make a mistake, instead of just letting their mindset go wherever it goes. That's a big part of the education of the workforce. And I'll just relate one particular element, and that's knowledge-based performance mode. If people don't understand the performance modes, and a shameless plug here, I'm actually writing a book on this right now. And I was writing this morning about knowledge-based performance mode and mindset. if people don't understand knowledge-based performance mode, that when they don't know what they don't know, here's the probability for error. It looks like a mindset problem, but it's actually a knowledge and skill problem. So that's taken into account all the way through, because you're absolutely right, Fletcher. You have to shift people's mindset. But I love what Sidney Dekker said. If you want to change someone's paradigm or their mindset, you have to give them a paradigm that's more powerful than the one you're asking them to leave. And that's what human performance and human factors education really does. When someone understands the performance modes, they'll use it at home, they'll use it at work, they'll use it at play, and they'll use it on your vessel. When they don't understand it, then again, their mindset can be anywhere that their brain takes them. So I hope that answers your question. And if you have a follow-on, I'll answer that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fletcher and Rob. We know that was a lot of information in 1 hour to take in, but we would love any engagement that however you all want to do it. Hello.
And another thing that I'll go ahead and add is that that online.improvewithfit.com, a lot of the things that Ian talked about today are on that website in snippets of information. There's a link called Insights in there. There are speeches. There are webinars that we've done on other things. But a lot of there's something called Robservations, which are small, less than 5-minute videos on some of these concepts. So for instance, the question that Fletcher asked and the question that was asked earlier, some of the deeper answers to those questions are in short free videos that we've posted there on the website because so many people asked them. So let's say you have a leader that says, why can't I just get people to stop work when they're in trouble or they don't know? There's a video on the human basis reasoning for stopping work and how difficult that is. So I encourage you to go to join that online.improvewithfit.com and take advantage of those resources so that you're not constantly trying to remember what Ian so well presented here over this last hour, but you can go in and watch a video, have some of your colleagues watch a video, and then have a discussion about what that video said in 2 to 5 minute increments.
Pankaj, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I saw you had your hand up. You may go ahead and ask a question if you have one.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Justin. And first of all, thanks a lot to Jan for a very nice, wonderful, I think precise and to the point talk on this very crucial topic. And thanks also to Rob for answering my question on negligence, which I think makes it pretty clear. Also, I just want to raise one more point here, which somehow I didn't see addressed here. How do you place mental health of the seafarers, which is very, very prevalent, especially now during pandemic times, but not only during pandemic times, but I think it had been ongoing for last few years, at least it has been spoken about, which was never done before. And to add to this also, I would like to know how would you feel or how would you reckon the availability of internet on board, which has increased the connectivity of the seafarers with their families, and sometimes it ends up bringing the domestic problems on board, and then it affects the mental health and overall effects onto the individual's performance, leading to incidents. And as we know, more than 80–90% of maritime incidents are one way or the other related to human element. So how would you address these two matters? One is the mental health and one is the availability of internet on board.
Do you want me to?
I'll go ahead and start that. Go ahead, Ian.
No, please go for it.
Well, it's a very deep question, and it's an important one. I think one of the things that COVID has done is elevated the importance of understanding and managing our mental health. It was a topic that rode below the surface, no pun intended, for so many years. And I think that COVID has opened up the opportunity to talk about that. I can give my personal experience in that as someone who went to sea for long periods of time in the era where there was no contact with the outside world. I was on a submarine, so we didn't know what was going on. And that was almost in one way, a mental health and error prevention mechanism for the focus that was needed at sea. So the important thing is to give people tools to manage these elements, whether it's mental health or errors and incidents in general. What we've noticed is that attitude, desire to be at work, the way people interact and engage is enhanced in a positive way by their education and integration of these human performance and human factors elements. It takes a little bit of the edge off the workforce belief that if they make a mistake, they're going to be punished for it because they're to blame. And that actually improves the mental health of the individuals in the organization at all levels, from senior leaders, some of whom are terrible about blaming people, but they feel bad about it, but they don't know anything else to do. So through the education of senior leaders, managers, staff and crew, and workforce and contractors, it helps reduce those burdens, and that impacts mental health. As far as the other one, having the management tools for managing distractions, and if you think about the attributes that drive error, those don't really change, and we may not be able to take away the stressor, the thing that stresses someone out. We may not be able to take away the distraction, but you can give people tools to manage those elements at all levels of the organization. So that's an ongoing effort. A very good question, and I think that the traps, the triggers, and tools help people manage those conditions. Now that someone from home could call and vent on why their children aren't learning during virtual learning, and how much pressure and stress is on the family. We never had that before, and now we have that stressor. We need to give people tools to manage that. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. In fact, I was just wondering that providing internet on board is probably one of the tools to manage mental health or stress. But I'm really not sure whether it is actually working in favor or against it.
I think it's definitely a double-edged sword, and just in my experience over the years, almost everything technologically that we introduce brings that double-edged sword in. So what we have to do is teach people how to manage this new input, and again, the using the 5 pillars and using a lot of the work that we've done over the last 30 years, it helps people manage it, as opposed to saying, well, we just won't have that. Because the bottom line is, if it's not that, it's going to be something else.
Thanks, Rob.
Great questions. Thank you. Here's the next question for you guys. Shipping is a conservative industry, and here we are talking a shift in mindset / revamping systems. How does the panel view getting through the teething issues towards implementation?
Justin, can you just repeat the question again, please?
Yes, I can. Shipping is a conservative industry, and here we are talking about a shift in mindsets slash revamping systems. How does the panel view getting through the teething issues towards implementation?
Rob?
Okay,
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
okay, I'll take this and then maybe Rob can add on it. Uh, okay, my personal opinion on this one is that in shipping industry, right from when ISM came in and when we started actually formalizing our procedures, initially our procedures were like few hundred pages. Now from 90s, late 90s to now, and at present time, when we see our procedures, our SMS, it has now gone beyond 2000 pages. And what we have done is that in these years, based on my own personal experience of reviewing over SMS of over 400 companies, I hardly see companies taking out anything from the procedures on the SMS. They just keep adding on, adding on. And it's more like, and the language which has been used is more like procedures who has been written by uh, some lawyer. And in general, like I've seen companies taking a pride when they're using some, you know, some words which are really difficult to understand. So this is like for very, very heavy words. So now the shift where the industry is going more towards having a, you know, a simplified system. Now that is something which is again more to do with the training and getting believe in the system that yes, if we have a system written in a simple language using simple words, that is still very important, and it is as far as passing the message across what you require. I think this is something which is now really very, very much required in the shipping industry. In most of the incidents, I'm sure you will all appreciate with this, that in most of the incident investigation when we do, our top two findings what we say is that procedures are not complied with, right? Or crew member not familiar with the procedures. And most of the time, our corrective action for these two findings, the root causes for what they say, is we just add on another procedure on top of it, or we carry out one training. So this is something where we really require a shift. And as Ian mentioned in his presentation, that 90% of the events are caused by something other than just the individual. So we need to start looking more on a shift from not just looking into the individual and getting him trained, but looking over a holistic view on the system.
Ian, did you want to add to that?
I was just going to couch it, Robin. Maybe you could speak from experience in terms of introducing it to different industries, and also just speak to something that came up last time was about whether it's compliance driven or whether it's why we don't want to just respond to the regulatory requirement.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And every industry that starts to dip their toe in the water of reducing human error has this fear is probably the wrong word, but has this fear that it's too big of a shift for them. So what we do is we start with the senior leaders, and we give them that mindset change that then opens the door for them to understand how they can think differently and how they can behave differently. Ian alluded to the gear model. That was created because leaders are going to be the key as to whether you move away from just trying to comply with something and move towards trying to improve it. Now, if you ask leaders in most organizations, they'll say, of course, I want to improve. But the proof is in when we sit down with them, either virtually or in person, and we have those discussions And we get to answer face to face that question about where do you place negligence, because we know there's some of that out there. Well, you may know that it's out there. Do you know what percentage it takes? Do you know what the probabilities are in skill-based, rule-based, and knowledge-based? So what we've done is shifted the conversations in these high-risk industries that are just like shipping. They're just there may be a few years ahead. Nuclear was the same way. We had to change the leader mindset in nuclear before they would even accept that human performance or human error reduction was a thing that they should be doing. What they were doing was, if a nuke made a mistake, they would fire the nuke and replace them with someone else. And that went on for decades until we started understanding, the leaders started understanding that there was a better way to look at human performance, human error, human factors. So that leader education piece and the shift of their mindset and the shift of their paradigms, once they realize that it's not a 180-degree shift. We hear a lot. We used to use a terminology. Well, this is a big ship and it takes a long time to turn to change a culture. But the reality is the behaviors and the language of leaders is not that difficult to change in small groups. So Ratchet's organization and Ian, myself, and some others, we're out there talking to these leaders, and they will walk out of the room and start having science-based discussions about these elements instead of the old opinion-based discussions about the elements. So they have to be given that science. The leaders need to be educated so that they can integrate it into the way they do things day to day. And then they can start working on the organization. One of the biggest mistakes, and if shipping and maritime isn't careful, they will make this mistake. One of the biggest mistakes industries have made is they've thrown the tools at the workers without the leaders being the first ones to use tools and models. If you can get leaders to change their paradigm a little bit and use their models and use their tools, the workforce is going to be easy. If you can't get the leaders to do that in our organization, we just back away. If we can't get the leaders to change their language and behaviors to what we know works, we'll just tell you, call us later. Because the leader language and behavior changes associated with their new paradigm are what will drive the change. So I know that's a long answer to a short question, but every single industry has faced this, and it becomes about the approach that you have to use with the leaders that determines whether that mindset will change quickly or not change at all. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you for the great question. I do have a couple of more on deck. Sometimes experience helps to prevent error on board. Practical implementation of knowledge and procedure is not always possible. How do you look into this matter?
I'll go ahead and keep answering. Experience does help in preventing errors. And then there's a but. So that experience tends to put people in what Ian captured as rule-based performance mode. And then some people use tools intuitively. The problem is that not everyone is a natural high performer. You probably know people in your organization that talk out loud to themselves. They probably fit that category of a natural high performer. I wasn't. So it fits into the knowledge and procedures have to be available and workable for anybody that needs them, not just the experienced person. I think shipping is gonna, if it's not there already, it will soon cross the bridge of some other industries, in that you will have an influx of new people, and they're gonna have to rely on those procedures and processes because the experience may have gone away. That's another thing that COVID has done really in the world of industry, is shown us that we have to be prepared, not just for having a whole bunch of good people that have been around a long time doing things, but to have systems in place. If the newer person has to do that, then we need it done successfully. So that that element is all a part of the education, integration, and sustainability strategy. And Justin, if it's okay, I'll just go ahead and answer the next question about the effectiveness. Yeah, we have all kinds of data. From a financial perspective, just in people who have integrated our concepts, we've seen over $300 million in reduced in ROI over the years. But what's probably more important is that the safety rates go down, the quality rates go up, customer satisfaction goes up, and Ian and Ratchet can provide you individually, if you'll email them, a whole list of benefits that are quantified. So, you know, with over 300,000 students globally, we get an email a day on how someone has used these concepts either at work or at home to reduce the probability or to minimize the consequences of some kind of mistake. So yes, if you'll email Ratchet or Ian, then they can certainly provide some of the data for that. Some of it anecdotal, some of it just straight data.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments from anyone?
Well, I want to thank everyone for being here, and certainly thank Ian and Ratchet for putting this together. Ian, I think you did a great job. If you do have any questions, please feel free to email us or answer it. I do encourage you again to go to online.improvewithfit.com and sign up. It is free, but it opens up a lot of the questions that were answered and asked, and maybe some of the questions that weren't asked. There's resources there that you can tap into. And I'm going to turn it over to Ian and Ratchet to close this out. Thank you very much for having me, and thanks for being here.
Appreciate it, Rob. Ratchet, anything you would like to say?
No, just a note of thanks to all the participants, and special thanks to Ian and Justin for moderating this at so early hours for you guys. And yes, any questions if you have following this webinar, please feel free to contact any one of us, me or Ian, and we would be happy to answer it and take it further.
Wonderful. And just to echo that, thank you everyone for being on the webinar with us here today. If you encourage you to go to onlineimproveofit.com, and if you've got any questions, you'd like any follow-up, please get in touch with Ratchet or myself. Thank you. All the best, and please be in touch.
Thank you, everyone.